Jason Mitchell was about to propose to his perfect fiancée at Manhattan's most exclusive restaurant. $3,000 champagne, 4-carat diamond ring, her wealthy parents smiling across the table. Then the waitress leaned in and whispered 4 words that stopped his heart. "You must escape. Now." Before he could react, she added, "Armed men. In the building. 30 seconds." Jason looked through the window and saw 3 men in black, guns concealed under their jackets, scanning the restaurant. They were looking for him. He had a choice: stay for his perfect proposal or trust a stranger and run for his life. He ran. Bullets followed him through Manhattan's alleys. His fiancée's calls filled his phone. But what he discovered next was more shocking than the assassination attempt, the waitress who saved him. Her brother committed suicide because of Jason's ruthless business decisions. She had every reason to want him dead. So why did she save him? This story will change how you think about success, revenge, and redemption. Stay until the end. What city are you watching this video from, and what time is it? By the way, if you're enjoying my videos, I'd be so happy if you could subscribe to my channel and like this video. Jason Mitchell was dining at the most luxurious restaurant in Manhattan with his fiancée Sarah and his future in-laws. Everything perfect. $3,000 champagne. Diamond ring ready in his pocket for the official proposal. Pleasant conversation. Then the waitress approached to serve the wine. Young, trembling hands, pale face. She leaned close to Jason's ear and whispered 4 words that froze his blood. "You must escape. Now." Before he could react, she added quickly that there were armed men in the building. They had 30 seconds, maybe less. Jason looked at Sarah, who was smiling obliviously, at her parents, who were laughing at a joke. Then he saw through the window something that confirmed the horror. 3 men in black entering the lobby with concealed guns. And he understood that this waitress had just saved his life. But why? How did she know? And what did those men want from him? Jason Mitchell was 34 years old with a fortune built on ruthless intelligence and some morally questionable decisions. He had started with real estate investments, then moved to tech startups, cryptocurrency, strategic acquisitions. Now he owned an empire valued at $400 million. He lived in a penthouse in the Upper East Side with views of Central Park. He drove a Porsche. He wore $50,000 watches. He was any woman's dream, and he had chosen Sarah Rodriguez. Sarah was perfect for him. Beautiful, cultured, wealthy family, impeccable social connections, the daughter every rich father dreamed of having. They had been together for 2 years, and that night Jason had planned to make it official with a marriage proposal in front of her parents. He had chosen the Golden Swan, the most exclusive restaurant in Manhattan, reserved a table in the private area, ordered 1996 Dom Perignon champagne, and had in his pocket a ring with a 4-carat diamond that cost the same as an apartment. Sarah's parents, Robert and Margaret Rodriguez, were exactly what Jason expected. He ran an investment bank. She chaired charitable foundations and cultural committees. Impeccable clothing, refined conversation. That kind of old money that looks down on new money like Jason's. But they accepted him because he was successful. Because their daughter loved him. And because they probably hoped his new money mixed with their old prestige would create something even more powerful. Dinner was going perfectly. Exquisite appetizers, excellent wine, pleasant conversation about travel, investments, the opera season at Lincoln Center. Jason felt the ring weigh in the inner pocket of his jacket. In 10 minutes, he would make the proposal. He had planned everything. He would call the waiter to bring the special dessert. He would stand, make a brief moving speech. He would kneel. Sarah would cry with joy. Her parents would applaud, and his life would be sealed in that varnished perfection he had always wanted. Then something strange happened. A young waitress, maybe 25 years old, approached their table to serve the wine. Jason noticed her because she seemed nervous. Her hands trembled slightly as she served. She was pretty in a simple way, brown hair pulled back, impeccable black uniform. But there was something in her face, paleness, sweat on her forehead, eyes that kept looking toward the restaurant entrance. She leaned to serve wine in Jason's glass, and as she did, she whispered in a voice so low only he could hear. She said he must escape now. Jason looked at her confused, thinking he had heard wrong. But she continued quickly, her voice trembling. There were armed men in the building. They were coming. They had maybe 30 seconds. Jason felt his blood freeze. Was she joking? Was she crazy? But then he looked at her eyes and saw pure terror. She wasn't joking. He straightened, looking around, trying not to draw attention. Sarah was laughing at something her father had said. Margaret was checking her phone. Everything seemed normal. But then Jason looked through the large window overlooking the restaurant's main lobby. 3 men were entering, dressed in black, robust build, coordinated movements. And although they kept their jackets closed, Jason had lived long enough to recognize the bulge of concealed guns. They moved with purpose, eyes scanning the restaurant. They were looking for someone. They were looking for him. Jason's heart began to beat hard. Who were they? What did they want? He had enemies, certainly. You don't build an empire without crushing some competitor, without making decisions that leave other people ruined. But armed men, this was another level. The waitress had moved away but was looking at him intensely, waiting for him to do something. Jason had to make a decision in seconds. He could ignore her, think she was exaggerating, continue dinner and make his perfect proposal. Or he could trust this stranger and ruin the most important night of his life with paranoia. He looked at the men again. One of them had said something to a waiter, pointing in the direction of the private area where Jason was. The waiter was nodding nervously. Jason made the decision. He stood up suddenly, smiling at Sarah and her parents. He said with a voice trying to stay calm that he had to go to the bathroom. Stomach problems. Too much wine, perhaps. Sarah looked at him concerned, but he made a reassuring gesture. As he walked toward the bathrooms, he passed near the waitress. She whispered quickly that the service exit was behind the kitchen, that he should go now, that they were coming. Jason didn't go to the bathrooms. He went straight toward the kitchen, ignoring the protests of the chefs, found the service door and exited to a dark alley behind the restaurant. The November cold hit him. He was fleeing from the perfect dinner, from the proposal to Sarah. But above all, he was fleeing from 3 armed men who wanted what? To kill him? Kidnap him? He didn't know. What he knew was that an unknown waitress had just saved his life, and he needed to discover why. Jason ran through the alley, his heart pounding, adrenaline burning his veins. He heard shouts behind him, heavy footsteps. They were chasing him. He turned the corner, crossed a street, dove into another alley. Manhattan at night. The streets he knew well suddenly seemed like a dangerous labyrinth. He heard a gunshot. The bullet hit a wall next to him. Brick fragments hit his face. God. They were shooting in downtown Manhattan. Who were these lunatics? He kept running until he found a cafe still open. He dove inside, crossed ignoring the waiter's protests, exited through the back door, jumped into a passing taxi. He told the driver to drive anywhere, just drive. The taxi driver looked at him confused, but saw the terror in his eyes and obeyed. Jason looked through the rear window. No one was following him, at least not now. The phone started ringing. Sarah. Jason ignored it. It rang again. Sarah again. Then messages in rapid succession. Where are you? What happened? My parents are worried. Jason, respond. How could he explain? How could he say he had fled because a waitress told him there were armed men? It sounded crazy even to him. But he had seen those men. He had heard that shot. He told the taxi driver to take him to his penthouse. Then he stopped. No. If they knew where he was dining, they probably knew where he lived, where he could go. He had properties scattered across America, but it took time to reach them. Hotel. Too traceable. He was about to tell the taxi driver to take him to the train station when the phone rang again. Unknown number. Jason hesitated, then answered, a female voice. The waitress. She asked if he was okay, if he had managed to escape. Jason exploded, asking who the hell she was, how she had his number, what was happening. She remained calm. She said there was no time for explanations by phone. They had to meet. There was a safe place. She gave him an address in the outskirts, a neighborhood Jason didn't know. She told him to come alone, not to tell anyone, and above all, not to go to his house. Jason asked why he should trust her. She responded with a sad voice that he shouldn't. But if he wanted to stay alive and understand why someone wanted to kill him, he didn't have many options. Then she hung up. Jason was left with the phone in his hand, the taxi driver looking at him through the mirror, waiting for instructions. Every instinct told him this was a trap, but every instinct had also told him to escape the restaurant, and it had been right. He gave the taxi driver the address. As they drove toward the outskirts, Jason saw Manhattan pass through the window, the city where he had built his empire, where he had thought of proposing marriage tonight, where he had thought of starting the next chapter of his perfect life. Now he was fleeing like a hunted criminal, pursued by armed men, trusting an unknown waitress. How had he gotten to this? The address was an old building in a working-class neighborhood. Jason paid the taxi driver and climbed the stairs to the 3rd floor. He knocked on the door with the number she had given him. The waitress opened. She quickly looked down the hallway to make sure he was alone. Then she quickly let him in. The apartment was small, modest, nothing like the luxury Jason was accustomed to. She offered him coffee. He refused brusquely. He said he wanted answers. Now, who was she? How did she know about the armed men? Why had she warned him? And above all, who the hell wanted to kill him? The waitress sat down, her hands clasped nervously. She said her name was Michael Navarro. She had worked at the Golden Swan for 3 months. But before that, she worked as an accountant for an investment company. A company Jason had acquired and then dismantled 2 years before. Jason looked at her, trying to remember. He had made dozens of acquisitions. Couldn't remember them all, Laura continued. She said her brother Michael worked at the same company, management level. When Jason had acquired the company, he had fired half the staff to restructure, among them Michael. Her brother was 42 years old, had a family, a mortgage, kids in college. He couldn't find another job. Depression hit him hard. 6 months later, he had committed suicide. Jason felt the weight of those words, but tried not to show it. He said he was sorry, but what did this have to do with tonight? Laura looked at him with eyes full of contained tears. She said it had to do with everything, because Michael wasn't the only one. 10 other fired employees ended up in financial ruin. Families destroyed, houses lost, lives ruined. And some of them had decided Jason must pay. The men in the restaurant were relatives of one of those employees. Laura had recognized them because she had seen them at funerals, at meetings where they talked about revenge. Initially, she was with them. She hated Jason Mitchell with every fiber of her being. She had taken the job at the restaurant because she knew he dined there often. She had planned her revenge, thought about how to ruin him, how to make him suffer as her brother had suffered. But then she had seen him with Sarah. She had seen how he looked at her, how he held her hand, how he smiled at her parents, and she had seen something she didn't expect: humanity. Jason wasn't a monster. He was a man who had made ruthless business decisions, yes, but he was also a man who loved someone, who wanted to build a family, who probably had never thought about the human consequences of his business decisions. And when she saw those men enter with guns, ready to kill him in front of his fiancée, in front of innocent people, she couldn't allow it, because her brother wouldn't have wanted this. Michael was a kind, peaceful man. He never would have wanted someone to die to avenge him, so she had warned him. Jason listened to everything in silence. When Laura finished, he sat for a long moment. Then he did something that surprised her. He apologized, not with empty words, but with a voice that trembled. He said he didn't know about Michael, about the others. That when he made acquisitions, he only thought about numbers, about profits, about efficiency. Are you enjoying this story? Leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Now let's continue with the video. He didn't think about the people behind those numbers, about the families, the dreams, the lives he was destroying. Laura looked at him surprised. She didn't expect this. She expected arrogance, justifications, the usual narrative of, it's just business. But Jason seemed genuinely shocked. He said he couldn't bring back her brother, couldn't erase what he had done. But he could try to do better if he survived tonight. Laura nodded. She said the men were still looking for him. They knew his properties, his usual places. He had to disappear for a while, let the situation calm down. Did he have anywhere he could go? Jason thought. He said he had a family house in upstate New York, small, rustic, nothing luxurious. A place he rarely went. Maybe they didn't know about it. Laura said he should leave that night. No luxury car, no driver, travel normal, anonymous. And he shouldn't tell anyone where he was going, not even Sarah. Jason hesitated at this last point. How could he disappear without telling the woman he loved anything? But Laura insisted. If he told her, she would worry. Maybe she would come looking for him. He could put her in danger. It was better this way. Jason spent 3 weeks at the family house in upstate New York. It was strange living like this. No assistants, no drivers, no luxury. He did his shopping alone in a small town where no one knew him. He cooked his meals, cleaned the house. For the first time in years, he lived like a normal person. And he discovered something surprising. He didn't hate it. The silence of upstate New York gave him time to think. To think about his life, about the decisions he had made, about the people he had hurt along the way. Michael Navarro wasn't just a name now. He was a real person with a sister who loved him, a family that mourned him. How many other people like him were there? How many lives had he destroyed to add more millions to his account? Sarah called constantly. At first, Jason had ignored. Then he had sent a vague message saying he had a work emergency, that he had to disappear for a while, that everything was okay. She was confused, hurt, angry. Her parents were furious. How dare he disappear like that from dinner? It was crazy behavior. Maybe he wasn't the right man for their daughter after all. Laura called him every few days to update him. The men were still looking for him, but less intensely. The police had received reports of the shots at the restaurant and were investigating. Some of the men had been identified and arrested. Others had fled. For now, Jason was safe, but he should stay hidden a little longer. During those calls, Jason and Laura began to talk about more than just security updates. They talked about their lives, their regrets, how they found themselves in this impossible situation. Laura told more about Michael, about his passions, his dreams. Jason listened carefully. Each story was like a punch in the stomach, a reminder of what his actions had caused. One night, Jason did something he had never done. He opened his laptop and began researching all the other fired employees from the company he had acquired. He found their names, their stories. He discovered that 3 others besides Michael had died. 2 suicides, one from a stress-induced heart attack. Others were in poverty, struggling to survive. And he had never known, never wanted to know. He called Laura that night and told her what he had found. He told her he wanted to do something, help these people. Not to absolve himself, not to buy forgiveness, but because it was the right thing to do. Laura remained silent for a moment, then asked what he had in mind. Jason explained he wanted to create a fund, $1 million to start, maybe more, to help the employees he had fired, to support their families, to pay for therapy, education, whatever they needed. He also wanted to change the way he managed his business. No more ruthless acquisitions, no more mass layoffs without thinking about human consequences. Laura said words were easy. Actions were what counted. Jason agreed. He said when he returned to Manhattan he would prove he was serious. But he needed her help. He needed someone who knew these people, who could make sure the help went where it was needed. Laura hesitated, then accepted. But she warned that if it was another empty PR maneuver, she would expose him publicly. After a month, Jason returned to Manhattan. The men who had been looking for him had all been arrested or had fled abroad. The police had closed the case, considering it resolved. Jason could finally return to his normal life, but he discovered he no longer wanted that life. The first thing he did was meet with Sarah. She was at his penthouse. She had waited for him despite the anger and confusion. When he entered, she hugged him tightly. Then she hit his chest, crying, asking how he could have disappeared like that. Jason sat with her and told her everything. The armed men, Laura, Michael, the truth about what his business decisions really meant. Sarah listened in silence. When he finished, she asked what he would do now. Jason explained the fund he wanted to create, the changes he wanted to make in his company. Sarah nodded slowly. Then she said something that surprised him. She said she was proud of him, that the man who had left that restaurant was different from the man sitting in front of her now. And she loved this new man even more. But there was a problem. Her parents, Robert and Margaret Rodriguez, were not impressed with Jason's transformation. They saw the fund as a waste of money, the business changes as weakness. When Jason finally met with them to explain, Robert said clearly and bluntly that if Jason continued down this path, he wouldn't have his blessing to marry Sarah. Sarah looked at her father in shock. She said she didn't need his blessing, that she would marry Jason anyway. But Robert was inflexible. He said if she married that changed man, he would disinherit her. Margaret agreed with her husband. It was a matter of principle. They couldn't have a son-in-law who showed such weakness in business. Jason looked at Sarah, waiting for her response. She looked at her parents, then at Jason, and made a choice. She told her parents she loved them, but they couldn't decide her life. That Jason had become a better man and she would stand by his side. If it meant being disinherited, so be it. Some values were more important than money. Robert and Margaret left furious. Sarah stayed, hands trembling but face determined. Jason looked at her with admiration. He told her she didn't have to do this, that he would understand if she chose her family. But Sarah shook her head. She said he was her family now, and they would build something better than what her parents had. 6 months later, Jason and Sarah got married in a small, intimate ceremony. Nothing luxurious like the Golden Swan, just a simple trattoria with true friends and people who really cared. Laura was there, sitting in the front row, crying tears mixed with joy and sadness. Joy for the new beginning, sadness because her brother wasn't there to see it. The fund Jason had created had already changed several lives. Families that were struggling now had support. Children could go to college. People in therapy were healing. It didn't erase what had happened, but it helped. And Jason worked personally with each one, listening to their stories, learning from his mistakes. His company had changed radically. No more ruthless acquisitions. Instead, partnerships that benefited all parties. Employees treated as people, not numbers. Profits were still important, but not at the cost of humanity. Some investors left, saying he had become too soft. But others came, attracted by this new model of ethical business. Sarah had found her purpose working with the fund, using her education and connections to expand it. Her parents had finally tried to reconcile, but only under conditions. Sarah had declined. She said when they were ready to accept her and Jason without conditions, she would reconsider. Until then, she was building her life on her own terms. Laura had become director of the fund, making sure every dollar went where it was needed. She and Jason had developed an unlikely friendship built on brutal honesty and mutual respect. She never let him forget where he came from, what he had done. She was his conscience, his constant reminder to stay on the right path. During the reception, Jason made a toast. He thanked everyone for coming. Then he said something that surprised many. He thanked those men who had tried to kill him that night. Because without that shock, without being forced to flee and reflect, he probably would have continued on his destructive path. He would have married Sarah for the wrong reasons, would have continued hurting people without knowing it, would have lived an empty life, hidden behind luxury. He said sometimes you need to be about to die to understand how to really live, and that he was grateful for the second chance. Grateful to Laura for saving him physically, but also morally. Grateful to Sarah for having chosen him over her family. And grateful to Michael, even though he had never met him, for teaching him through his tragic story that actions have consequences, that behind every number on a balance sheet is a real person. Later that night, as Jason and Sarah danced under the stars, she asked if he regretted how things had turned out, if he wished he had had that perfect proposal at the Golden Swan, instead of this complicated path. Jason hugged her tight and said no. He didn't regret anything, because that path had brought him here, to the man he was now, to the life they were building together. A life based on real values, not appearances. Sarah smiled and told him she had something to confess. That night at the restaurant, when he went to the bathroom, she had seen the armed men. She had seen Laura whisper to him, and had understood something serious was happening. She had been tempted to follow him, but something told her to trust, to let him handle it. She had chosen to believe he would return, and she had been right. Jason looked at her surprised. He said she had been braver than he thought. She laughed, saying she had learned from the best. They continued dancing as the party went on around them. Two people who had found something real in chaos, who had chosen values over comfort, who were building a life that had meaning, and in a corner, Laura watched them dance with silent tears. She thought about Michael, about how he would have loved to see this, how his tragic death had paradoxically led to something beautiful. It didn't erase the pain, didn't bring back her brother, but it showed that even from the darkest tragedy, light can emerge, that people can change, and that sometimes saving someone means saving yourself too. Like if you believe sometimes it takes a crisis to show who we really are. Comment if you've also made decisions thinking only about the result without considering the human impact. Share this story to remember it's never too late to change and do better. Subscribe for more stories that prove true. Wealth is measured in values, not dollars. Sometimes life puts you in front of a mirror in the most brutal way possible. It shows you who you've become, what you've done, who you've hurt along the way. And at that moment you have a choice. Turn away and continue on the same path, or face the truth and change. Jason chose to look. He chose to change, and in the process he discovered that the life he thought he wanted was empty. But the life he built afterward, with effort, with humility, with true human connection, was rich beyond all measure. Because in the end, it's not money that makes a life rich. It's the people you love, the values you fight for, and the peace you find knowing you've done your best to leave the world a little better than you found it.